Hi all, I'm Alexei. Today I'll tell you about one wonderful thing. This is server-side of web application. This part includes many subtopics. It can be hard to fully understand all of them, but fortunately I wrote out the basic principles of these applications and collected the most necessary information to understand this topic. More specifically, today I'll tell you about what a web application is in general, what communication between users and the applications look like, what is a web server. The main part will also be server software, what task it solves. Of course, we will not do without programming languages, their differences and application structures in these languages. Of course, you will also hear a lot of interesting things about databases, why it is a crucial part of the server. I also want to talk about APIs, and in the end we will discuss the hardware of servers. What is it and what does it looks like? So, what is web application? In today's world, this phenomenon is very common. All applications that we use and that have access to the work over the internet are web applications. The basis of the internet is communication. Communication can be between users and user can communicate with applications. So the lastest is called server-client communication or client-server architecture. This model is used for all web applications. It has a client part and a server part. The first makes request to the server part, and the second processes request and gives response to the first. Only this way and nothing else. The client can't send the request to the client, and the server cannot be the initiator of communication with the client. The rule works for all applications. What is a client? In general, this is what the user sees in the application. It can be a website or a desktop application or even game. The user can interact with this. In the world of development, a client is called a front-end. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. What I want to discuss today is called the server part or backend. This is exactly the part of the iceberg that is hidden under the water. Servers are responsible for high functionality of application, for its logic, data storage, and so on. And I consider it that it's much complex than client part. So what is web server? First of all, a web server is a computer program that can be installed on any operation system on any computer. The main task of such server is to receive HTTP requests, process them, and give HTTP response. Web server also called as HTTP server. And what is HTTP request and response? Surely you have all seen the prefix HTTP in the address bar of the browser. Moreover, a program that can understand HTTP is a browser. The abbreviation HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. In other words, it is a set of rules that allows the browser and a web server to communicate with each other. The browser access to this server after we have entered the site address. The web server response is an HTTP page with content. So this web server is a program that connects the browser with the server technologies, which we will discuss next. The main task of a web server is to accept the request and understand what to do with it. So now I would like to consider the structure of the server. I divided it into parts, software and hardware. So the software part is one that is responsible for the mechanism, logic, and server setting. I also divided it, this software part, in three important groups, like the server part, databases, and APIs. The server part is responsible for writing the code for the smooth work of the server. First of all, the task is to create a server, also distribute the path to accepting request and sending response. Also, the server side is the link between the client and the database, which we will discuss later. And in the end, it's very important that all these tasks were carried out quickly and efficiently. And all of this can be achieved by programmers through programming languages. there is the best coding tool. Languages can be different, since almost all popular ones have a framework responsible for a server-side. Let me give you an example. So, one of the most popular language is JavaScript with its server-side Node.js, Python with Django, Go, PHP, Ruby with Ruby on Rails, and even Java. Basically, their difference lies in the syntax, but in fact, a good backend can be made on any of them. Also, one important thing about writing code is the structure of the MVC. Translated, it means Model View Controller. This is a coding pattern in which the logic is distributed into 3 different components. Model, View, Controller. The model receives data from controller, performs the necessary operation and passes it to the view. Usually this looks like a data schemas. A view is an interface that receives data from a model and passes it onto the view. It can be dynamic components that will be visible to the user or even entire front-end application. So through the view, the server receives information from the user and passes it to the controllers. It turns out like a loop of data. And finally, controllers create functions by interpreting user actions and notifying the model to change the data. It looks like a set of functions. But our approach lacks one very important thing. The architecture described above is called two-tier application. It's where we have client and server. But it has big drawback, such as when reloading the page, all data is lost and the user goes through everything again, even registration. Of course, this approach is not suitable for the full functionality of the application. The server needs information about the user, information to fill dynamic pages. Sometimes requests require more than just processing information. It happens when you need to get some information from the server storage. At such moment, the server accessed the databases. Working the databases is simple enough. The client accesses the server, it makes request to the database, data comes from there. Each column has a specific data type, each cell has a value. In short, the database is a separate product that quickly finds the requested information and saves it, even when the server is completely rebooted. But as we can see, all this data passes through our server part, so the client cannot directly access the databases. So the data type can be different depending on control systems. There are 2 types of databases, relational and non-relational. Relational, or in other way SQL, are used in applications where needed a clear data structure with a logical set of relationships. So the data in such case is stored in tables. Such a structure is somewhat similar to Excel tables, which are stored in the same folder and have something in common between each table. This is a set of relationships. I will explain with example how is it. Next, data in non-relational databases can be stored in objects where other data objects can be stored. Thus, it makes the data structure more flexible. Programmers use this type because it has high functionality and fast implementation or realization. That is, they don't need to think over the data model, but add them in stages. Let me give an example. We have data, accommodation and feedback on it. In relational databases, this information will be stored in 2 tables, one with accommodation and the other with reviews. In each of them, there will be a reference to each other. This reference is called a relation. In non-relational databases, we see the name of the accommodation and its review as a key to the object. It will be easier to get information about the review in a non-relational database. We have considered databases. We can move on to an equally interesting topic as APIs. In fact, everyone explains this topic differently. I understood it like something that allows you to receive data from other developers in a separate form and give information to your own application after processing this data. The simplest example is a web API. It looks like addresses in the browser to which developers send requests and receives data in a certain format, usually JSON. This is quite similar to client-server requests. But in this case, a client is a third-party server that sends requests to the APIs to get the data it needs. All possible requests are written in the API documentation. I will give an example. Surely all of you have seen in some third-party application inserted functions from other sites. For example, Google Maps in food delivery application. So Google provides its own Google Maps APIs, and others can insert these functions into their application. To summarize, we can say that APIs is a code. It's data that has its own documentation and description of how to access it. IP gives information safely, sorted, without unnecessary information, and strictly on requests. That's why many developers really like to use it. And if you have come across the concept of API, you have definitely heard of REST prefix to it. REST is like a set of rules and conventions for writing API so that it can be used happily ever after. API that adhere to these rules are called RESTful APIs. Almost everyone follows this format. At the output, the IP has the format of a JSON object and the ability to perform CRUD operations. CRUD operations is a create, read, update, and delete data. We have considered the basic view of the server software, its functions. Of course, we have a lot to add, but this is enough to start. Of course, everything behind all this functionality should be a hardware. The server can be either an ordinary PC and server PC, or even many buildings with these server computers. It all depends on the size of the company and the number of customers they serve. Let's take an ordinary computer and a server as an example. The first and important difference in the purpose of these computers. An ordinary person needs beautiful and high quality graphics, so the ordinary PC works for graphics. But the server usually doesn't display graphics on the screen, therefore it doesn't have productive video cards. Operating systems are also different. We use usual Windows or macOS, since server computer usually use Linux, BSD, etc. Servers also differ. Servers use a more economical option. However, I've seen many people who use the same instruction in their PCs. Servers are different in appearance, but basically they are divided in two groups: rack and blade servers. The main difference between the two is that racks are server computers that are independent enough to be used for different purposes, but blades are one system of server computers used for one large server. Small servers, up to 30 computers, use racks. If the server needs 30 plus computers, using blades will be more efficient. You can see in the slides how racks and blades looks like. It's all for today. We have covered the basic concepts of web application, how the server communicates with the client over the internet. Also, we discussed the software. Just to repeat, it contains three parts: server, database, and APIs. The backend is written using programming languages. In general, it processes information to receive and send data from and to the database. The database is a separate product that quickly finds the requested information and saves it even if the server completely rebooted. And an important part of application is the APIs, the functions of third-party servers that simplify the development of the application. In the end, we discussed server hardware, what are racks and blades, and their functions. This was an overview of server-side web programming, and I was with you, Alexei.